Hey everyone, I thought I'd go in and I'd just walk through the UI one more time to make sure we're all clear on what each element is, how I put it there, that type of stuff. Okay, so we have menu controller. It's a prefab. You could be editing it in the prefab or in your scene. Doesn't matter. It's an empty game object. I started out with an empty game object, named it menu controller. Then I right-clicked UI canvas to get me to having the menu controller canvas. The menu controller canvas, I don't believe I messed with any of the values inside of it. I believe that's all it is, just a canvas. Then there are two panels inside of it, which are empty game objects, which I just used right-click, create empty. Both of those panels take up the full screen, so you hit this, boom, and then you set all of these values to 0. That's how you make both of them take up the full screen. See how the blue nodes are there? By the way, the reason my monitor has these aspect ratios is because in game I hit a drop down and I'd selected 1280 by 720. You could type that in by hitting the plus, or you could fight with the build settings and try to switch to Android and all that, but you know, it's not worth it at the moment. I have 1280 by 720 right there, and that's why my aspect ratio looks like this. Most of you are probably operating under like a 16 by 19 or free aspect. Either way, ooh, come on, zoom out. What's going on? There it is. That was weird. Okay, so we have two empty game objects for play panel and options panel. So I just right-clicked create empty to create each of those, and I named them. And then I set them both to having the same fill out. So I just tapped that and zeroed those out. Inside of play panel, since it's taking up the full screen, I want it to have a button in the bottom right. Let me turn off options panel just to be clear on this. So you right-click play panel, then you hit UI button. It will create a button. It would most likely do it in the middle, like this. Boom. And the way I got it in the bottom right was I hit this, the center object here, and I said, okay, I want you to lock to the bottom right corner. That's what that one means. And when I hit this, you'll see that these little triangles now show up here, but the object is still up here, because when you move an object around with this, it tries to retain its last position. So to solve that, you then zero out the position X. You see that dotted line? It's saying, okay, I'm moving it out. So boom and boom. That gets me to the bottom right-hand corner. And now not only do I want to be pivoted at the bottom right corner, or anchored at the bottom right corner, I also want to be pivoted. So pivot is my from myself, and an anchor is from my parent. So I want myself, my pivot, to be on the far right and bottom side. So 1 on the X, because that's 100% on the right, and 0 on the Y, that's 0% from the bottom. And now I have to zero out these pause X and pause Y again, and I'm there. Depending on the assets you use, you'll need to position this element differently from here, but what I did was I gave myself, I think, probably, that looks like about negative 20 pixels on the X, 20 pixels on the Y, and I gave myself a width of 200 and 100 on the height, and that's my button. So that's what I did to get there. Now let's talk about the options panel. So like I said before, the options panel was created by doing a create empty. And then hitting this and zeroing out the left top and everything so that it takes up the full screen. Then I right-clicked UI image to create this BG overlay. And that's just to give you a nice little background when this options menu is up. I then did, since I want there to be a foreground image, I right-click UI image one more time, and I called it foreground panel, FG. Inside of that foreground panel, after positioning it, so the background overlay was positioned again to take up the full screen, so I hit this, and then I zero out these elements. So it's already done. To get to this foreground panel, what I did was I right-clicked UI image, and that got me to here, so I have that. And then I needed to size it to, I did a percentage base, so my anchors, instead of being all anchored to the center, and then I size outward with my width and height, I instead said, okay, I actually want you to be percentages of my screen, so 0.2 on the X to 0.8, so I'm taking up 80% of this, 60% of the screen on the horizontal plane, and I believe I also did 0.2 to 0.8 on the Y. So I'm taking up 60% in both directions of the screen from the center, from that pivot. So I'm going to say, okay, the way now that I've set those anchors, I have to zero out my top, my left, my right, and my bottom. And now I'm at that size. So I'll delete that. Okay, so now we're here. I have my foreground panel. I added the image. I sized it the way we want. And now we have a button, close. Very similar to that options button. Let me just hide that. I'll start from scratch. UI, button. Very similar, except instead of doing the bottom right, we're doing the top right. And now you see that moved those triangles up there. I'll zero out my pause X and my pause Y, and you'll see that moved the object up to that with its anchors, and then I again need to change the pivot, but instead of being pivoted from the bottom right of the object, I want to be pivoted from the top right of the object. So pivot, it would be 1 and 1. That makes it top right. And I already see this one circle here now has 2 little circles around it because they have bad UI. But let me move that. You see how it's moving around that little circle? So I set it to pivot 1 and 1. And now I need to zero this out one more time. And I'm officially pivoted from the top right corner. And now my little X could go in there. And I probably did like a 20/20. How far off did I do it? Looks like I have a -10 offset. So let me go -10 and -10. It depends on what your little X looks like to know what width and height it'll be. I recommend starting out with a 100 by 100 width and height. And now we're back to having that button. After that, so we have our button, you're basically done. The only thing left to do is to follow through. I'll provide the script on the side, but to attach to play panel. Why does it keep doing that? It's like super zooming in for some reason. My computer's in a bad mood today. On play panel and options panel, I added this menu panel script to it because they're both panels that can open and close, and that's what these guys are in charge of. And I'll provide that script on the side. and then button close on the FG panel, this button that we created and I helped you place, it will tell the options panel to close itself. So you drag option panel into the first slot, menu panel, close panel. And then at the same time, it's going to want to open the play panel again. So you drag play panel into here, menu panel, open panel. And the exact opposite happens on play panel. Play panel has its button, the options panel opens, and play panel closes itself. Same thing, it just inversed. And that's just so that you can go from one panel to the next by pressing that little gear button or whatever, you know, your options button is in the bottom right down here. And then when you click on this button, it goes back to the play screen. That's all that does. And I'm going to provide you with all that stuff. All that good stuff. All right, thanks guys. Bye.